And I'd like to invite the next speaker to the stage, a man who needs nearly no introduction, Professor Jonathan Drezner, who's going to talk about one of the most central themes in sports cardiology, sudden cardiac arrest. The floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here amongst friends, colleagues in this learning environment. We're going to change gears just a little bit and talk about some of the unique features and opportunities around recognition and management of sudden cardiac arrest in athletes. These are my disclosures. Currently, I'm editor-in-chief of the British Journal of Sports Medicine. We'll see some articles from that journal. As everyone knows, screening's not perfect. I'm a big advocate for quality cardiovascular screening, inclusive of ECG, but no matter how we screen, athletes will continue to have sudden cardiac arrest. And it's not just our high-profile athletes. Cardiac arrest is the leading cause of sudden death in young athletes during sports and exercise, and in fact, 75% of all fatalities in sport are cardiovascular related. So ask yourself whether you're a sports medicine physician, sports cardiologist, another clinician, just a parent in the room, you consult with a club. If there was a cardiac arrest on your watch, are you prepared for SCA? What I want to do is look back at the last 2 decades, mostly data from the US, and talk about survival from SCA in athletes before we get to some of the unique features of recognition. This was a study we published in 2008 looking at exercise-related sudden cardiac arrest and survival trends in youth in the US from 2000 to 2006. In a cohort of almost 500 young athletes, survival was only 11%, somewhat paralleling survival rates from out-of-hospital cardiac arrest in the US. You can see a slight uptick in 2004, 2005, and 2006 in survival related to the beginning placement of AEDs in the community. This led to a consensus document that I had the opportunity to co-chair, where we interviewed medical professionals who were involved in resuscitations, and we sort of took a leap of faith on how we should respond to SCA in the athletic setting. This was outside CPR guidelines, where we basically said you must suspect cardiac arrest in any athlete that is collapsed and unresponsive, and then the treatment algorithm should be simple. Call for help, start chest compressions, and get an AED. We performed a 2-year prospective study amongst high schools within the US. This was about 2,100 high schools throughout the US. We followed them quarterly for 2 years. We had 95% follow-up of those schools still talking to us at the end of that 2-year program. 87% had a good AED program and emergency action plan. And we looked for outcomes of cardiac arrest on school grounds. So for all comers, we had 59 cases, 71% survival on school grounds. For our adults on campus, 61% survival. If you were a high school student with SCA, 85%. And if you're a high school student athlete with SCA, 89% survival rate in this study. And all of those cases were exercise-related and witnessed. More recently, we published data on survival from exercise-related cardiac arrest in our high school students across the US. This is data from 2014 to 2018. I'll draw your attention to the blue box, where in 2018, survival rate was 78% across the United States for a high school athlete who has exercise-related sudden cardiac arrest. If there was an on-site medical professional in the US, an athletic trainer for an on-site AED was used, survival was over 80%. We can learn from our Japanese colleagues as well that have amazing emergency preparedness for their endurance events in Japan. This is a research letter published in the New England Journal, 2018. 28 runners with witness SCA. You can note that the mean time to CPR was less than a minute, and the mean time to AED shock about 2 minutes, 100% survival from exercise-related sudden cardiac arrest. So my first important take-home message for everyone is that sudden cardiac arrest in athletes is largely a survivable event through prompt treatment and access to an AED. This is the emergency action plan and your universal response to a collapsed athlete that I promote in any athletes who's collapsed and unresponsive. And when I say unresponsive, that's unresponsive to shoulder tap and verbal stimuli. We must assume it's sudden cardiac arrest, call for help, start chest compressions, get the AED. And be aware of some of the signs and features in the red box that might misdirect our resuscitation and make a rescuer think that this is not sudden cardiac arrest. For instance, continued respiratory movements or agonal gasping, seizure-like activity, having the eyes open or rolled back, or perhaps falsely assuming the presence of a pulse. Of course, we know that comprehensive emergency preparedness is not just about having AEDs. We have to have all staff awareness. We have to practice and rehearse our response. And more recently, the implementation of a pre-game medical meeting or medical timeout where the home club and the visiting club come together to talk about what that emergency response on the field will be. It's interesting to look back for me over the evolution of survival and the data that produced this over the last couple decades in the US. In a study I did very early in 2003, we were surveying college institutions across the US whether or not they should have an AED in their sports facilities. That sounds sort of silly now, but back then we were asking that question. We also asked questions if they had had a cardiac arrest and if anyone survived. In that particular study, there were 5 cases in athletes and they all died. We followed that with a case series with, I think, 11% survival. We did the consensus statement. We had some data on our youth athletes with low survival. We started to see cross-sectional data with the implementation of EAPs and AEDs. An updated consensus statement in 2013, more survival data finally showing better improvement in survival. This is a study with 78% survival in 2018 and some more recent data. But if we look past in the last couple of decades, from 2006 to 2018, a 21% to 78% improvement in survival. That's a 271% improvement over 12 years. There's debate. We're here. Yesterday we had a meeting at the ESC on whether we should be screening and how we should be screening. There is no debate here. There is no debate that having a proper emergency action plan, having availability to AEDs, saves lives. So what about recognition and management? What are some of the unique features that we see? Because it looks different when you witness exercise-related SCA. This was a nice editorial published in BJSM in 2019. When you see an athlete go into VT or VF on the field of play, they often will collapse suddenly. Sometimes they'll stumble or put their hands on their knees. Most of them will collapse in different positions. They almost all universally have ongoing respiratory movements from ventilatory drive that will deteriorate over time to agonal gasping. They almost all have their eyes open or fixed or rolled back. And about half will have seizure-like activity that could be gross myoclonic activity or perhaps just shaking and quivering in a limb. I'm going to show you a video that we put together. This is about a 2-minute video. This is the QR code. We put this together about a year ago. At different times, we've prepared simulations and videos trying to show people what cardiac arrest looks like. This time what we did is we put together real-life cases in a compilation to show the features of sudden cardiac arrest in an athlete. Thus far, we've got about 75,000 views. This is freely available on YouTube. Please download it, take it, use it in your club, use it at your institution. Show this and educate your colleagues. Show this and educate your parents. I think everyone who cares for athletes on the field of play should see this video. Hi, and in the next 100 seconds, I want to show you how to recognize sudden cardiac arrest in an athlete.
The timeout huddle, his head dropping. He stumbles, then alarmingly, he falls face first.
Here you see Keontae, head drop, stumble, sudden collapse. This is what sudden cardiac arrest in an athlete looks like.
And collapses, just like Hamlin did, in sports from football to lacrosse to baseball.
In Mark Vivian Foe, he shows all the signs of sudden cardiac arrest. Continue breathing after collapse. Eyes open and rolled back. The face of sudden cardiac arrest. For DeMar, after his arrest, his arms go up with seizure-like activity. And for Christian Eriksen, a sudden collapse, also unresponsive, eyes open, brief seizure activity in his leg. This is sudden cardiac arrest.
We've been there, but that's not a good look at all.
With Claire, dramatic episode, collapse with seizure-like activity in the arms, an amazing emergency response. Call for help, someone go get the AED. remember, in a collapsed athlete that is unresponsive to verbal stimuli and a shoulder tap, you must assume it's sudden cardiac arrest. Call for help, start chest compressions, get the AED. Anyone can save a life. I want to stop for a moment before talking about this slide and go back to the volleyball case for Claire. You know, there's been a series of events in the US, very high-profile athletes, where there are 20 medical professionals on the sideline to save a life. The best resuscitation I've ever seen was that high school case of Claire. Volleyball player, 16 years old. The first people out of the stance were her parents. The next person was a medical professional, an athletic trainer. You don't need 30 medical professionals to save a life. You need one person who knows how to recognize it and quickly manage it and has access to an AED. This is a nice new international collaboration. Very happy to present some preliminary results, and I want to thank the leads of this study, Simone Thomas and Professor Dorsey, who's here. Professor Solberg is also here and builds on his prior work as well. So we tried to find every video we could on sudden cardiac arrest and look at that for certain features. I can't go over all the results, but I just want to draw your attention to some of the things we've already talked about. So for eye appearance, while a good majority of the cases we can't see the eyes, in every single case we saw the eyes, they're open and fixed or open and rolled back. Same thing, we couldn't see the chest in every single video, but in every one we did, they have continued respiratory movements after collapse. And again, this could misdirect the rescuer. When we look at survival in these cases, some things really show up. In certain parts of the world, we're doing better. In certain parts of the world, we still have a long ways to go. So survival and AED access in Africa, Asia, South America. I know this is just a set of cases that we found videos, but still survival is not as high as we'd want. And this mimics prior data from the FIFA Sudden Death Registry, where again, in North America and Australia, you had better survival rates. But really in Europe, Asia, South America, and Africa, you have very low survival rates. And interestingly, if you look at the bottom square, in 81% of cases with delayed CPR, the delay was due to misinterpretation of symptoms or unawareness. So lack of recognition of SCA. Just because we have an EAP, just because we have an AED there, if you don't know when to use it, it's not as helpful. Very happy and proud that the Resuscitation Council UK has put these nuances of exercise-related SCA into the first resuscitation guideline. So this came out, Resuscitation on the Field of Play. It's now a consensus paper just published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. I would look at this, but this includes all the things that we've talked about just now. So again, sudden cardiac arrest in an athlete could also stand for sudden collapse of an athlete. We have to recognize, respond, and revive. To recognize and remember the key features: sudden collapse, unresponsive, eyes open, continued respiratory movements or gasping, and seizure-like activity. You must respond, call for help, someone get the AED, expose the chest, and then revive. Start CPR, apply and use the AED as soon as possible, and resume CPR immediately after the first shock. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for an inspiring talk. We have time for one question. And if you're not quick, I'm going to ask one. What we also witness in these videos is something I find quite horrible, and that's the tongue sweep maneuvers or the clearing the airways maneuvers. How are we going to get this out of the minds of especially all the other players and the other athletes who sometimes severely delay the onset of CPR?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think this is about education and awareness. So when people come up to an athlete who's collapsed, they're often thinking it's a seizure and we should open the airway. They do a jaw thrust or even a finger sweep, completely unnecessary. There is nothing else in sport that causes that kind of non-traumatic sudden collapse where the person is also unresponsive. It's SCA.
Words to remember. Thank you so much.